Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to my channel. My name is Paul, the Canadian Snowman, here with another awesome video. We're doing the 100 Years War. I've been actually wanting to do this one for a while, and apparently the series is over, which is what I was waiting for. I didn't want to start the series and then finish it and still have one or two episodes left, because I've done that in the past, and I don't like, because then when I come back to it, I feel like I'm forgetting a lot, and I feel like I'm kind of like out of the moment because I've been away from it for so long. So I actually prefer to do series, the whole series at once. Excuse me. But now 100 Years of War is 6 episodes, not really, which I think is like kind of the perfect length for a series. I think because I'm probably going to do soon. Eventually, I'm going to do the Muslim expansion. I've been wanting to do that. I think that's like 9 episodes, and I've been putting off the Genghis Khan one or whatever it is, like 24 episodes, because I know like once I start that, it's going to take a while to finish. So I'm delaying doing that one. So there's definitely ones I'm definitely looking forward to eventually. But for now, it's the 100 Years War. And if you're new to my channel, I've done a lot of series and a lot of different wars. So definitely check out my playlist. But for today, 100 Years War, I'm going to start something new. 24-minute video, pretty solid running time right there. And yeah, I've done the what was that, War of the Roses, and apparently that was after this. So I feel like I'm kind of watching a prequel. Kind of not see now. I'm trying to remember how War of the Roses started. So, but I don't know. If I remember correctly, I believe this war has Joan of Arc. Is that her name? I don't know. I think so. Yeah, I think so. I guess I'll find out, right? I believe someone named Joan of Arc, which I guess is a woman warrior. I just know the name. I just know the name, and that's a woman. That's all I know. I don't know what she accomplishes or anything like that. I just remember. I just know of the name, but I believe she's in this war. But anyways, guys, we're gonna jump. I already said that, so I'm gonna go ahead and stop delaying. You guys know me. I love to talk and babble on. That's why you love me, right? Get myself in trouble, say the wrong thing, then you guys correct me in the comments, and I'm like, oh yeah, I feel like an idiot, and all that fun stuff. But anyways, 3, 2, 1. Oh yeah, like and subscribe, please, if you haven't yet. I'd appreciate it. We're closing in on 3,000 subscribers. Woohoo! Thank you very much. We did it. Woohoo!
1453 marks a conclusion to the age of medieval Europe and the beginning of the early modern age, characterized by the feudal system's decline, increased economic prosperity, and more centralized government.
Okay, so basically the Middle Ages is basically ending right now. So I was kind of curious, like, what really defined like the Middle Ages. I guess it's just like this element of chaos and people trying to take over stuff, and now like things are kind of getting to be more set in stone. Like it's, what I'm saying. It's more things settled down. People kind of got their areas, and it's not as chaotic, basically, right? And this is usually kind of the time period that you see in movies. I don't know. Anyways, yeah, I don't know. Let's just keep going.
Decline, increased economic prosperity, and more centralized government. It was famously the year which saw Constantinople's final fall. But that wasn't the only earth-shaking event taking place in 1453. On the other side of Europe, a victorious French army marched into the city of Bordeaux and seized it, ending the final chapter in a century-long conflict between England and France, the 100 Years' War. How did this generations-long war begin? What were its famous figures, great battles, and impacts on the world? Welcome to the Kings and Generals series on the 100 Years' War.
So basically, it's the French versus the English, right? Which is like classic battle. Like when it comes to like countries. I mean, the two biggest rivals that that when I was growing up or whatever, learning about history, like watching movies and stuff, like it was always the French versus the British, and always found it really interesting. I mean, got to basically, I always kind of looked at it like this way, like France kind of had like it was like a bigger country, and it just had more troops, better like better troops on the ground. But then you had like Britain. I always looked at the huge naval power, where I guess, but like they're a good naval power, but they really couldn't. I don't think they could take over France because they just didn't have, like, I guess, the men on the ground to kind of really be able to do that. And France, they'd have to cross to get over to Britain to kind of win that. And it just, we didn't, just to get them over there, they weren't going to win the seas. That's kind of how I always looked at like France and Britain. One ruled the land, one ruled the seas, and now you guys can tell me in the comments how wrong I am. Anyways, yeah.
Beginning with the Battle of Crecy in 1346. 2021 is just starting, and we've decided to spend more time this year on self-development. If you want to join us and work towards, are going to get unlimited access for 1 week to try it out. You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. When William, Duke of Normandy, conquered England in 1066, his status as a vassal of France's Capetian kings gave rise to a paradoxical situation in Western Europe. The monarchs of England now held ancestral territories on the continent as a vassal of the French kings, while also being rulers of a strong realm. Sometimes they controlled even larger territories in France than their overlords, a trend which reached its zenith.
Oh yeah, so England right now has a big piece of land in France. Okay, I'm trying because I've done the Viking Age and then like the Normans and stuff like that, and I'm trying to like piece together in my head what took place first. But anyways,
even larger territories in France than their overlords, a trend which reached its zenith between 1154 and 1204, when the Angevins ruled more than half of the country. This didn't last for too long, however, as a succession of strong French kings, beginning with Philippe II Augustus, gradually conquered more territory, and by 1224, all English possessions on the continent, save for Gascony in the southwest. This narrow strip of maritime territory had grown prosperous under English rule and developed into an important source of royal income through the wine trade, often raising more in annual revenue than England itself. Gascony's population valued the connection it had with the island monarchy, and were not French as we know the French in our time. The duchy's language in the Middle Ages was a separate Gascon tongue, and its people had little to no ties with the people of northern France or its Capetian monarchy. Contemporary author Jean Froissart goes so far as to call the inhabitants the English. In 1259, King Henry III was forced to sign the Treaty of Paris, in which he renounced his claims on most continental lands, but was confirmed in his status as overlord of Gascony, but only as a vassal of the French kings, to whom he was obliged to pay homage. This is widely thought to be one of the factors which made the 100 Years' War inevitable. Despite the peace, a number of dynastic and territorial wars over the next half-century ratcheted up the tension between England and France even more, giving both sides experience in raising armies and waging war. This state of affairs probably would have continued for a long time, but on January 31st, 1328, Charles IV, the last king of the main branch of the Capetian dynasty, died without a male heir and left his kingdom in a dynastic crisis. Despite the fact that the English king, Edward III Plantagenet, was a nephew of the dead king, the French lords decided that his cousin, Philippe of Valois, which was the cadet branch of the Capetian dynasty, would inherit the throne. To justify it, they cited the ancient Salic law, which prevented
so I get. Sorry, I shouldn't have stopped at the beginning of his sentence right there. But the France is like, why? Even though Edward has more claim to the throne, apparently, if he takes over, then basically France becomes kind of English, and then like all hell breaks loose because then the people, rise up against them, and then it's just chaos. So I guess it makes sense, and they don't want their their country France to be be in an uproar, or they did they probably powers that be there probably we can probably control Philip a little more than Edward kind of thing. I don't know. That's just what ran through my head.
Valois, which was the cadet branch of the Capetian dynasty, would inherit the throne. To justify it, they cited the ancient Salic law which prevented women from inheriting any land, a ruling which affected Edward because he was related to Charles IV through his mother Isabella.
Wow.
Edward at the time was young, and England was under the control of Isabella and her lover, Roger Mortimer.
Okay.
So in 1329, he paid homage to Philippe VI. A year later, the now majority-age Edward and his supporters slew the despised Roger Mortimer and exiled Isabella to Norfolk, which allowed him to assume control of his kingdom. The newly minted English king marched north in 1333 and crushed France's Scottish allies at Halidon Hill, leaving David II to seek refuge in Paris at his allies' invitation, who then announced that any future talks must take Scotland's interests into account. Edward was not amused, and thereafter considered the French king, his nominal overlord, an adversary.
Nourished is a 3D printed personalised gummy, full of high-impact vitamins and nutrients, tailored just to...
I just find it interesting how France's ally is Scotland. You think that Scotland and England would get along just fine, right? But I don't know. I guess in history there's always seemed to be some kind of rift between Scotland and England, just I guess from movies and stuff I've seen. So I guess they've always had a little rift between them. I don't know. Or maybe it's England wanted to take over Scotland, and Scotland was like no, and kind of use France as a backer, to prevent that, right? I don't know. Here we go, guys. We're building it up.
Considered the French king, his nominal overlord, an adversary. This is probably what led England's king to grant the fugitive French Count Robert d'Artois refuge in 1336. He had been found guilty of poisoning his aunt in a dispute over the inheritance of the eponymous County of Artois, condemned to death and then chased out of France. Robert arrived in London and was warmly welcomed by Edward III, who granted him an earldom, a few castles and stipends, despite the fact that Philip VI had declared himself a foe of any who harboured the criminal. When Philippe sent a demand to Edward through the Seneschal of Aquitaine, ordering his vassal to surrender Artois, the demand was rejected and both parties began preparations for war.
Okay.
Since Robert was actually in England, where Philippe VI technically had no jurisdiction over Edward, rather than in French territory, the order was viewed to have no legal legitimacy, which further displayed the king-vassal paradox created by the Norman conquest of England. All of these tensions came to a head on May 24, 1337. On that day, Philippe declared that Aquitaine no longer belonged to Edward because of the many excesses, rebellious and disobedient acts committed by the King of England and against us and our royal majesty.
Wow.
In particular, citing his granting of haven to Robert Artois. The king then called his feudal lords to summon to war, the so-called arrière-ban, and this is widely seen as the beginning of the 100 Years' War, despite the lack of actual declaration. Instead, it was the culmination of many growing tensions, such as the gradual centralization of government, the unworkable nature of the Plantagenets' vassal status, and other factors. The conflict began on two fronts almost immediately, as the French began raiding an under-garrisoned Gascony. While that was happening in the south, a cash-strapped Edward III crossed the Channel into Flanders, England's closest commercial partner through the lucrative wool trade, and purchased the Holy Roman Emperor Ludwig IV's allegiance, but didn't gain too much benefit from the expense. Even after being forced to sell the royal crown of England off for funds, Edward launched a campaign into France with around 12,000 troops, and eventually faced off against Philippe and his army, who outnumbered him 2-1 at Flamangerie in October. After a tense standoff, Edward retreated back into friendly territory and Philippe didn't pursue him. Though it was brief, the 1339 campaign was nightmarish for the local populations in Edward's wake. Medieval military strategy was to inflict as much carnage against hostile cities and agriculture as possible, which would weaken the enemy government, economy, and ultimately hamstring its ability to wage war.
Yeah, that would suck, man. You're trying to mind your own business, or then someone comes, takes over, and burns all your stuff down, man. What are you gonna do? You're trying to feed your family, and then all that happens. I mean, for 100 years, you have like generations of people here just stuck in war and chaos. I mean, that would suck to live back then, and especially, I mean, when it came to, I guess, recruiting, I guess, was every available man just, expected to join, or were they kind of drafted, that you're forced to kind of join the army? Kind of curious, like, how that takes place, or if you can just be like some dude is like, you don't have to join as long as you don't want to. Anyways, these poor people.
Economy, and ultimately hamstring its ability to wage war. The English king had seen the effectiveness of such tactics, especially in rich and densely populated lands such as those in northern France, and so the notorious chevauchée was born. While not yet fully developed, these chevauchées were low-cost raids, using limited resources, with the deliberate aim of systematically devastating and lowering the productivity of territories through which the raiders marched, all the while enriching the invader and weakening the allegiance between the conquered and their king. As the 100 Years' War progressed, the utility of this strategy was to prove itself indisposable. By the time 1340 began, though, Edward's campaign had left the king even more monetarily destitute than ever, but this didn't stop him from formally proclaiming himself King of England and France in Ghent during January of that year.
Wow.
The situation in the Channel wasn't going in Edward's favour. Ever since 1336, English coastal towns had continuously fallen victim to seaborne raids from French attacks. While the Plantagenet king's own captains often managed to retaliate with equal rapacity, Philippe VI had the larger navy, and there was a real possibility of England being invaded. Edward III therefore returned to England 2 months after his coronation in Flanders. The fact that he owed money to prominent creditors in the area also provided adequate reason to get off the continent. After making landfall, the king raised a new tax and immediately began assembling new forces for the war. Reinforcements and ships, mainly 150 or so converted merchant vessels known as cogs, were assembled at Orwell in Suffolk, ready for the attack. When all was prepared, Edward announced against the advice of his many close officials that he was going to attack France's 200-vessel-strong armada, which was anchored in modern-day Belgium, and destroy it. In defiance of those members of his entourage who decried the apparently foolhardy naval assault, Edward III proclaimed that, "I shall cross the sea, and those who are afraid may stay at home." He set sail on June 22nd, 1340. 2 days later, Edward's fleet managed to trap Philippe's ships at the port of Sluis, using favourable conditions and a hail of withering arrow fire from longbows to gain control of the battle. It was a decisive and surprising English victory. 10,000 to 20,000 French were killed, and it is said that only Philip VI's jester dared to inform him of the disaster.
That'd be scary. Man, I think I'd be more scared of arrows coming down on me than cannonballs. I mean, because cannonballs would just be like, bam, you're done, I think, Arrows, I guess you can hide from arrows a lot easier, just going underneath the deck or whatnot. I mean, cannonballs can go through it, but I don't know. Wow, England coming out on top so far, it seems like. Well, not so. This seemed like the first kind of like big battle here.
Only Philip VI's jester dared to inform him of the disaster.
Why?
However, Edward was undermined by resistance against his tax collection at home, and this forced him to go back to England. At this point, the 100 Years' War transformed into a proxy war when Duke John III of Brittany died in spring of 1341, igniting a succession crisis between his half-brother John of Montfort and niece Jeanne of Blois. This drew in the larger surrounding powers. England.
Oh man, so yeah, they're gonna have all these small battles because they don't want to really take on each other. It seemed like France kind of like lost a chance to kind of just end it, when they had the stronger navy, just to go ahead and take over England. That seemed like, something that could have like ended the war, like, just as it was starting. So right now, I guess anytime it's like a king or someone duke dies or whatever they're called, each side is going to pull for the one that favors them the most. So that's going to be interesting.
Blois. This drew in the larger surrounding powers. England, the duchy's merchants and its peasantry largely supported the former, while France and the higher nobility sided with the latter. Obviously. As well as opening up another front against Philippe VI, Edward's geopolitical interests were served by getting involved as well. English trade, reinforcement and communication routes by sea to Aquitaine went around the coast of Brittany, and a hostile ruler in the duchy might sever those vital connections. The war was initially going France's way, until Edward sailed to Brittany with a small navy in 1342, and launched a blistering chevauchée through the enemy lands, before besieging Rennes, Nantes and Vannes. After a few months campaigning, however, papal envoys negotiated a 3-year truce, and the English king returned to his kingdom in January 1343. Pope Clement VI tried to end hostilities by mediating a peace conference at Avignon the year after, but neither side would agree to the terms put forward by the other, and the war continued unabated.
I guess the Pope, man, he's just like, enough of this, man. Like, I'm just kind of curious, like, trying to think of like why the big reason the Pope is kind of in the middle of this. Obviously, I guess just because war is bad in general, but like, there's got to be another reason. I guess because each side is are Christian, right? So I guess he has other investments. He's got locked in place where he can't really gain from if these two powers are at war with each other. Yeah, no one's listening to you, Pope. Your influence is not so high right now.
And the war continued unabated. 1345 saw the first major English military venture into Gascony, with several thousand men under the Earl of Derby retaking Bergerac and then defeating a French counterattack in October. This action gave Edward time to plan and amass his forces in England. He sailed from Porchester in July of 1346 and landed at the Norman town of La Hogue with a large army, much to the surprise of the local population. This new theatre of war in Normandy was virgin land heretofore untouched by the conflict, and because of that, its devastation would massively affect any taxation that the Valois king hoped to extract from it. In addition, the destruction would diminish Philippe's prestige and hopefully goad him into an ill-considered battle. Whether Edward actually planned to campaign in Normandy is a matter of debate though, with some historians even claiming that the plan was to campaign in Gascony, but was thwarted by unfavourable winds. Whatever the case, the English army rested for the night, then set off at dawn, launching a blistering chevauchée throughout the Cotentin Peninsula. Normandy's rich countryside was intentionally ruined. Mills, barns and orchards were burned, while barrels of wine were smashed or stolen. Nothing was to be left for the French. Edward III reached Caen on July 26.
I'm guessing there was just too much to kind of save for themselves, because you think you get all this supplies and food, I mean, send all this back on the ships. Like it just seems to like common sense or something just to do. Where you make yourself richer by taking from them. But I'm sure they probably did that, and it was just probably too much to kind of handle, too much to take, I guess. So I guess it's one of those, you take what you can and destroy the rest, right? Yeah.
Sixth, but despite accepting the garrison's surrender, his army raped, plundered, torched, and killed without quarter.
Wow.
When the 3-day sack was complete, 3,000 townspeople were dead, and the king began sending barges filled with looted riches back to his kingdom.
Okay, there you go.
As a wave of terrified refugees fled before him, the English king marched inland towards Paris. At the same time, Philippe VI had received word of the landing and was massing a large army near Saint-Denis. However, it wasn't ready for battle yet, and therefore couldn't intervene as Edward reached Crecy, from where he sent raiding parties out to burn Saint-Cloud and Saint-Germain within sight of Paris's very walls. The English had shown Philippe's subjects that he couldn't protect them, and began marching north again, but now the French army began chasing them, and only narrowly missed an opportunity to pin Edward on the Somme's south bank. After he managed to cross, the now campaign-hardened army of England encamped in the forest of Crecy.
Okay, so England's basically just trying to cause chaos and trying to prevent, basically, Philippe from getting any kind of momentum going, and and stuff like that. And it seems like it's working pretty much, trying to make him look bad. But it seems like very risky because if Philippe catches him, your corners him, man, takes him out. That's it. That war is probably done, right? When the king's out. So it's definitely interesting, the cat and mouse that's kind of going on right now.
The now campaign-hardened army of England encamped in the forest of Crecy on August 26, 1346. Though Edward had managed to evade Philippe's larger army so far, the Valois monarch's vanguard was getting unnervingly close, so his Plantagenet foe prepared to turn and fight. After a brief reconnaissance, a plan was devised. As Philippe's host, the flower of medieval Europe slowly got closer. Edward drew up his now reduced forces on an elevated ridge between Crecy and Wedicourt, which looked south into a valley, daring the French to try and knock him off it.
You customize every detail of your character. Why not do the same for your PC?
All right, so it basically seemed like he's kind of even right now because the English, they're outnumbered, but they got the location advantage, and they're gonna have to fight them off. So here we go. I guess this is the first big battle because this is the one that they're showing us, the Battle of Crecy. Who's gonna win? I have no clue who wins this at all. No clue who comes out on top. So this is gonna be cool.
Daring the French to try and knock him off it. Exact figures for army size are impossible to calculate, but Edward's was probably just over 14,000 strong, made up of 2,500 chainmail-clad men-at-arms and dismounted knights, 2,500 spearmen, and 3,250 light cavalry, known as hobilars. A further 7,000 were England's lethal archery corps, armed with longbows and armour-piercing bodkin arrows. Since the reign of Edward I, every English village had been tasked with contributing men to the National Reserve of Archers precisely for this kind of battle, and were legally obliged to train in the longbow's use each week. This force was divided into 3 groups. 2 were in front on the left and right. The former was commanded by Earls Arundel and Northampton, while they followed Edward III's son, the 16-year-old Black Prince, into battle. The King's division remained in the rear as a strategic reserve.
Why is he called the Black Prince?
Into battle. The King's division remained in the rear as a strategic reserve. All 3 had infantry in the centre and longbowmen on the flanks, while fronted by a series of pits, trenches and stakes to serve as a defence.
Okay.
Edward went in among his men, inspiring and encouraging them, so that men who were inclined to cowardice became brave, whilst also warning them not to plunder until he gave permission, as doing so would endanger the army. Morale and discipline taken care of, the king allowed his troops to break ranks so they could sit, eat and replenish their strength before battle was joined. The king himself took up command of the field on an elevated windmill near his reserve division. Philippe's strung-out French army began its approach by late afternoon, consisting of just over 30,000 troops, 12,000 mounted knights, 12,000 infantry, and 6,000 crossbowmen. Since the sun was about to set, and the army was exhausted from the day's march, France's Valois king intended to heed the counsel of his outriders to encamp for the night and attack at dawn.
The crossbow, I mean the longbow, that goes farther, right? I'm not quite sure on like the distance wise, you know, between a crossbow and a longbow. I mean, and which one's exactly more accurate, but I mean, it probably just depends on the people who wield it. But you know, obviously the bowmen, they've been doing it for a while, they've been training for a while, so they got to be pretty accurate at that. I'm not sure about the people with the crossbow kind of thing. So but you think that the bowmen would have an advantage because they're higher up, so they can just shoot. They can shoot a farther distance just because of the the ground they're on. Anyways, so I guess we gotta wait at night.
To heed the counsel of his outriders to encamp for the night and attack at dawn, when the soldiers would be better rested and prepared. However, a combination of chivalric pride and Philippe's lack of control created a situation where he had to attack. It was close to 6 p.m.
Pride? Well, was his troops or like his? I mean, the advice was to wait till dawn the next day. You know, so obviously he has some generals or people in his corner telling him to hold off, and on his side to do that. But I guess the men or there's some other people, I guess, trying to like, let's just go, let's do it. And I guess it was kind of bringing, some controversy amongst men and stuff like that, or whatever you want to call it. And he's like, before, the men kind of get out of control, let's just go ahead and fight. We might not be ready, but it could be worse tomorrow kind of thing. I'm not sure, but as of right now, I mean, the English are rested up there. They got their morale kick. It seems like the French are disorganized and they're all on the same page, and they're tired. So right now it's just not looking good for the French at all. So right now everything points towards an English victory.
Created a situation where he had to attack. It was close to 6 p.m. by the time Valois contingents began their assault. First to advance up the ridge were the Genoese and French crossbowmen, who lacked their protective pavis shields. As they went forward, a short but incredibly intense thunderstorm soaked the battlefield, damaging the crossbows and rendering them useless. In contrast, the unhindered English longbowmen stepped forward and...
So rain and crossbows don't mix, apparently. I'm not sure exactly how that works. I figure it's just a different way of like a bow. It just looks different and set up different, but apparently I'm wrong. So I'd be interested to wonder why crossbows don't work in the rain. Maybe there's metal and they don't want to get hit by lightning. I don't know.
In contrast, the unhindered English longbowmen stepped forward and let loose a storm of arrows, slaying a great number of their French counterparts and setting the rest to flight. Witnessing what they had saw as detestable cowardice from their fleeing skirmishers, the Count of Alençon bellowed, "Ride down this rabble who block our advance," at which point the first contingent of knights charged forward and unceremoniously cut down their own infantry. This pointless exertion bogged down the knightly advance and left it...
That makes absolutely no sense. I mean, they were just got their butts kicked up there. Nothing but cowardice, like they were going to lose. I mean, they're getting slaughtered by the bowmen, and they're just trying to back away from that before they all die. I mean, you're just going and cutting your own men down, which obviously you're very valuable, you know, in a war to have more men, and you basically just did the job for the English and killed them for them. I'm not. That just makes no sense to me. I don't get it. Uh, the English, not the English, the French leader obviously does not have control. I mean, it just seems like everyone under him is just doing what they want to do, and it just sets up for disaster. These guys are going to go up the hill right now. They're going to get slaughtered. That's what I'm expecting right now, but that just annoys me that they just killed their own men.
This pointless exertion bogged down the knightly advance and left it struggling at the base of the ridge.
Here we go.
At this range, the longbowmen loosed with deadly precision, slaying the French and panicking their horses. The latter helped by 3 organ guns, which made a clamour of noise.
Wow.
Though some of the heavily armoured warriors managed to reach the English line, they were hacked to pieces by Edward's dismounted knights. The first charge had been a complete disaster.
Obviously, like I said, I mean, I was like, if these people turn around and like, come on, man, like be hypocritical and turn around and retreat now. But they went in, they died. But like, obviously, they're probably already hurt and pain and whatever, flustered. And then you have the men, the English, just waiting for them. Like, okay, we'll take you out now. You guys aren't ready for this, and they just, wow. English, man, game is on top right now, and like the French gotta get their act together. They really, someone with authority needs to step up and take control of the situation, basically. Because right now it's not going to. Like right now, they just need to leave and go and survive to fight another day, because this battle is basically over.
By Edward's dismounted knights. The first charge had been a complete disaster, but the day was not yet over.
Oh no?
Undaunted by the initial failure, France's mounted knights continued to mount charges on the English line, putting particular pressure on the English right flank, where the young Black Prince was almost killed. Almost surrounded by the superior numbers of his enemy, the Black Prince sent for help from his father, who refused and famously stated, "Let the boy..."
I forgot that basically the French had them way outnumbered, so they can kind of wear the English down and kind of bring up, I guess, more reserves, that are rested. So that's pretty much what's kind of going on right now. But here the French are coming back here, man. You guys are surprising me right now. Come on, friends, just to see what you got now.
For help from his father, who refused and famously stated, "Let the boy win his spurs, for I want him, please God, to have all the glory." After a while, however, the king did send 20 hand-picked knights to assist his son, who found that the Black Prince's contingent had already managed to repulse the charge and were now recovering before the enemy returned.
Good job.
In a subsequent attack, the blind king of Bohemia, John, ordered his knights to tie their horses to his own and led their liege into battle. This charge began well, managing to get past the archers, but they were then all cut down by the English infantry.
Wow.
The French
I'm sorry I keep pausing. Why is he called the Blind King? Doesn't seem like a great nickname to have.
But they were then all cut down by the English infantry. The French unsuccessfully charged 15 times in all, each becoming more disorganized and hopeless than the last. As the battle progressed, even Philippe VI himself joined the fighting.
What?
He was injured by an arrow and had more than one horse killed under him before the battle finally calmed. Witnessing the disaster that was unfolding, one of the Valois king's vassals persuaded him to withdraw. He did so reluctantly, fleeing with what was left of his army to a nearby royal chateau and then all the way to Amiens. In the dark, the English slept on their ridge, not realizing just how much of a terrible toll they had inflicted on the French. They had lost less than 100 men, while Philippe had lost over 10,000, including 1,500 lords and knights. While Edward III's tired troops were in no position to chase Philippe, he had gained a great victory and wanted to exploit it, marching to the port of Calais after his army rested and putting it to siege. As the town slowly starved, further good news came that a Scottish invasion prompted by France had been crushed at Neville's Cross near Durham. Calais fell on August 3rd, 1347. It would remain in English hands until 1558.
Wow.
Our series on the 100 Years' War will continue in the coming weeks, so make sure you are subscribed.
Wow. I mean, episode 1, round 1, English. I mean, 100 man to 10,000 man. That's just insane how the French just kept coming. They were getting slaughtered, just kept on coming, kept on coming. I guess it was just honor or whatnot. But man, it's like after enough, man, it's just time to just retreat. My God. The only thing I can see right now, Philip doesn't have control of his country, his men, or whatever. So, only thing I can see here for a turnaround for the French, something's going to happen to Philip. He's going to get assassinated, or else he'll just pass away through natural causes or something. But they need better leadership. They really do, and that's the only thing I can really see. For French to turn this around, France to turn this around. So I'm expecting maybe like a hero to come in, or like a general where it's going to take control of the situation, because Philip obviously does not have that. So I guess we'll find out next episode. And yeah, and Edward, like I said, double whammy, he stops the Scots up there. So things are looking pretty good for him, You can't get overconfident, though. I've seen so many of these series, or they just get overconfident. After a big victory, they just think they can't lose, and that's what happens. But anyways, guys, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Definitely an exciting start to this series and all that good stuff. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of it. Like and subscribe and all that good stuff, and we will continue with the 100 Years War. Woo! Fun stuff, guys. Peace. You guys have a great night, great day. I'm out of here. See ya.